Oh, the LinkedIn is causing a problems, as always. There's something wrong with the LinkedIn.
All right, and that's you're not broadcasting elsewhere. So
yeah, I do. Yeah, Facebook as well. It's just annoying. Okay, it's out again. LinkedIn let me down. It's fine. Righty, guys. So if you are just joining me in today, I'm having a conversation with Thomas Wedell-Wedellsborg, which I'm super excited about because I don't know how about you guys, but I'm guessing you're very much like me. We're spending so much time and energy on solving problems without thinking how we do that. And it turned out that there is a better way of doing so. And I wasn't fully aware about it until I grabbed this book. And wow, I'm so excited about this conversation. And thank you, Thomas, for being so generous with your time and sharing it with me today.
Well, thank you, Raf, for inviting me onto the show.
I need to start with coming clean with you and sharing with you my first thoughts and emotional state that I went through as I was reading very first few pages of your book. I felt stupid. I felt embarrassed and a little bit angry at myself. Why didn't you, Raf, spend time deliberately thinking, how do I solve my problems? It's almost as if I just went through my life without thinking how I solved them and just passing through it. Although with other skills, I'm so deliberate. Like as a manager, I think we all sit down and think, okay, I need to be better listener. I need to communicate better. I need to do this, time management, etc., etc. I'm spending so much time focusing on it. And I didn't spend enough time on getting better at solving the problems. So my question to you is, am I the minority or there are more people like me?
No, you are in the vast majority. Like it's been so interesting for me to see that we are really good at solving problems, but the ability to understand what problems to solve. So that the problem diagnosis or problem framing, if you will, that's just like a huge missing link. I mean, we've known about this concept for decades, but when I went out and actually examined how good people are at it, consistently, they just jump into solution mode. Like, there's a problem, we'll fix it. 85% of the CEOs that I spoke to in a survey, they basically said that their companies tend to waste way too much time, money, energy solving the wrong problems because we so automatically just switch in and say, oh, there's a problem, let me fix it, and we're good at that. But then sometimes we end up solving the wrong problems or not finding a good creative approach. So if it's any comfort, you're definitely not alone. And that's really why I wrote the book and I've done the work on trying to upgrade people's ability to solve problems, really.
Oof, I feel just a little bit better. So we're just following that theme. I know you've done that research and you've been working all over the world with different cultures, different level of management, which is all important because once you understand one another and where those problems come from, I'm curious to find out what are the key findings, the key traps that we're falling into with problem solving. You've mentioned one that we quickly jump into solving the problem. What are all the things that you found?
I think the second biggest one is really this idea that problem diagnosis needs to take time. So there's like, I think most people, if you tell them like, hey, you actually need to think about your problem, not just your solution, they'll agree. That's like, yeah, sure. But then the wisdom we have collectively is kind of, well, the way you do that is you go 2 weeks to the mountains and think deep thoughts about your problem and so on. Yeah. And that doesn't work. Like, listen, you will never have 2 weeks to go to the mountains for the vast majority of your problems that you're facing. And so, weirdly enough, this has been perpetuated. You know that Einstein quote, which is not actually from Einstein, about if I had an hour, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then 5 minutes solving it. Like that's a recipe for disaster. Like that's don't do that. Like that's called paralysis by analysis. And this whole myth, Einstein never said this, by the way, it's a myth.
Good to know.
that whole myth has just convinced people that, well, I know it's important to think about the problem, but we don't have the time to do it, so we better just jump into action and kind of solve it. And so one of the key points I make in my book is really to say, no, you can actually do this in 5 to 10 minutes. Like this is something you can do on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Whenever you have a problem, you can spend a little bit of energy making sure you're actually solving the right problem instead of just blindly charging ahead and then finding out 3 months later, oops, this wasn't actually the problem that the client cared about, or whatever it is. So I think that's the key other mistake I see, thinking that you need too much time to do it, and that'll never happen.
It very much reminds me when people think, well, I'm the manager, not the coach. I don't have time to sit down with you for an hour or two and just have those conversations. No. Coaching is not about that. Yes, you can do that, but there is a lot more value to it when you do it on the fly, when you do it on the go. And it's very much what you're saying is we can actually fix those problems quite frequently in real time almost, when just not taking that much time.
Such a beautiful comparison, because I think the same thing with feedback, right? A lot of people think about feedback from the coach as this annual ritual. Like, oh yeah, we sit down once every September and we have a half-hour conversation about your strengths and weaknesses. Kind of like, no. It has to be, if not a daily, then at least weekly habit that you have this practice of just giving very smooth, easy feedback in small increments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly the same thing with problem diagnosis. It has to be a habit of mind, something we do fairly easily, fairly quickly, so we can actually do it in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, I like to draw the examples from the world of sport as former professional athlete. And I always say that imagine yourself if a football coach in Premier League or any other professional football just sat down with your team every 3 rounds or every month to analyze the games and give the feedback to players. Very much like if the coach would look at the 10 games in a row, then sat down and define the problem and try to solve it, it wouldn't work. You have to respond on the go, and you have to just develop this habit, as you mentioned, reframing it on the spot, right? So I would love to have a conversation around the reframing part, because that's the part that really resonated with me so much. I went like, whoa. So could you tell me and ask a little bit more about the reframing process and what it is?
I'll share an example. I found the best way of explaining it is by sharing the example I call the slow elevator problem. And the slow elevator problem is, you imagine that you are the owner of an office building, and that the tenants in the building, they are complaining about the lift. Like, it's too slow. Now, most people, they just take that problem for granted. Like, they take the framing, okay, the problem is that the lift is slow, and now our job is to make it faster. If you talk to landlords, though, they will typically suggest a different way of handling that, which is not to make the elevator faster, but to put up mirrors in the hallway, so people go like, oh, I'm busy. They look up, they go, oh, that's beautiful, and they forget time.
Yeah.
The mirror example, or the elevator example, I like to share that as an example of what reframing is really about. The core notion is, whenever you have a problem, instead of just taking it for granted and solving it, then you actually spend a bit of time saying, is there a different way of thinking about that problem? Is the problem really what we think it is? And in this case, like the mirror, clearly, the mirror doesn't make the elevator faster. It solves a different problem, namely that people are annoyed by the wait. So the central act, and this is what reframing is about, is that step from saying, okay, what's the problem? Now, how can we rethink or reframe what that problem is really about? So I think that's the simplest way of kind of sharing it quickly.
I love it. I like it. And when I think about my time as a manager, and even my personal life and our lives, when we are being given the problem, we think, okay, we've been given the problem that we have to solve, almost like, hey, here's the puzzle, solve it. And you look at the puzzle, okay, I got the puzzle, now I need to solve it. The first solution comes into my mind. And because it feels good to solve the problems and have the answers, you say, hey, this is how we're going to fix it, because we, quote unquote, improved it somehow. We feel good about it. We're busy. We don't want to spend more time about it. So first thought is that, again, quote unquote, the right answer. And I'll just follow through with it. And we just perpetuate the same circle. And by the time we know, as you mentioned, there's that common wisdom of, hey, here's the problem, give me the answer, and move on and move on. And we don't even stop and think. What you're saying, when somebody offers you a problem, or if you face the problem, ask yourself, is that the right problem that I'm solving, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And I'd add to that, if you really want to make this more impactful, you want to have a couple of people you do it with, because there's something weird about, we have a problem, but we can be too close to our own problems to see them clearly. And so you can try to reframe your own problems, and you can, but it's just much, much faster, quicker, and more powerful to, like, if you can get 1 or 2 colleagues or friends to invite them into that conversation and say, hey, I have a problem, but I'm not actually sure I'm thinking correctly about the problem. Can you ask questions? Can you help me challenge my own thinking on this?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very powerful shortcut to like basically spotting your own blind angles, if you will.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit more of a team practice almost than an individual skill in some sense.
Yeah, and I like that advice because, again, from human nature, we're a little bit biased, and if we assume something, we want to prove ourselves right, and we just dig that hole, just go through that path continuously. And the longer we go, the further away from the problems that we're trying to solve we are, and then we're wasting that time and that energy. So I like just the idea of, hey, ask someone else, whether it's your coworkers, your spouse, someone else, to just look at the same problem. Now, you already kind of mentioned, but I just want to capture it as well. How do I frame the question to my people around the problem itself? Because I've got a feeling that especially the leader, the most influential leader, the one that is at top, the way they ask questions and present the problems and solution and mentioning this is possible solution or so already creates a barrier from that brainstorming. So how should I approach that question in that request?
Yeah. I think you share the problem, but then you make clear to people what the intent of the conversation is. So there's no magic formula, but the very simple sentence that I often ask is kind of, are we solving the right problem here? To deliberately, especially as a leader, instead of taking that usual role of saying, I have all the answers, going in and saying, folks, we have a big problem with this client. I'm not sure we understand the problem correctly. What are your thoughts on it? Like, how do we need to think differently about the problem before we go out and deliver this solution for them? And typically, many of the professional whether they're coaches or consultants or they'll tell you that if you talk to a client and a client has a problem, like 2 out of 3 times, it's actually not that problem you need to solve. They ask for one thing, but what they really need is something else. And it is your job to go in and figure out, wait, what's the underlying need here? How do we genuinely help them versus just giving them what they ask for?
So kind of feeling like it's what you're describing is what with the feedback problems. I'll go to it. We'll talk about a little bit later on. Now, so when you've mentioned that having that conversation with your team and presenting the problem, the first thought that popped into my mind that if I was managing the teams again, what I would share your story about the elevator. And then if I would go and ask my team to join me, I would go, hey, I've got the elevator problem. And here's the problem. So I'm immediately telling them that there is something probably wrong with that problem and I'm looking at it from the wrong angle. Can you help me? So I would proactively go and say, hey, this is the story. This is how we tend to approach it. We're going to work on it. And every time I'm facing problems, I'll go, hey, I've got the elevator problem, guys. I need your support.
Exactly. That's why I love that elevator example, because you can explain it in 30 seconds and then people understand what you're trying to do.
Yes. Absolutely. So let's just go through that reframing thing. And you mentioned we're jumping into the solution. There's an example that I solved and I would like to share with you guys. And it took me 4 years to solve it. And I thought I was actually proud about my first solution. And then I discovered that my framing was good, but then the solution was wrong. And that may be something that you also discovered. So for those who are listening to podcasts and audiobooks, then you might face the same challenge like I did. And that was that, hey, it's great to be inspired. It's great to have all that knowledge and wisdom, but I can't put it into the context. I can't put it into practice because I forget it. So just overload with the data. So I thought I need a better ways of capturing it all. So my first problem was, well, I don't have time for notes. I need notes, but I don't have time for notes. So I was like, oh, what I'll do is I'll screenshot the part of the interview that I really like, and I go back to it, and I make notes on my laptop and my books, and I'll have it. And that was the system that I've been using for a few years, and it worked. So, quote unquote, it solved the problem. What I didn't realize, it wasn't the best solution. There is a better solution, a lot better, a lot more efficient, because this one became very time consuming and wasn't very efficient. And then I just left it and I just forgot about it because I knew the more screenshots I do, the more mess I create for myself. I have to go through 2,000 screenshots and I was like, and it's just, I was carry on. A few days ago, what I realized is that I can record the actual part. So when you press the screenshot to record, it records the audio as well from the book or from the podcast. It's like, oh, that's good. I've got now a notes of the person who actually talks. So I no longer have to look at my screenshot, go back to the episode, rewind it, and check it. I've got this. So it's like, yes, I've solved the problem. And then a day later, I've realized, again, coincidentally, without any practice, I was like, what if I was recording and then switch to my note on my phone and make my mental notes? So what I have right now is that I've got a 20-second screenshot recorded with, let's say, you, Thomas, talking about a certain process of reframing, and I'm writing on the screen. But how about this? How does that relate to my feedback? So now what I have, 20 seconds recording with you coaching me or any experts coaching me and my mental notes in one go without going in too many places.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I find this super interesting because I do a little bit of a similar thing, not technological, but just like whenever you run into something useful, you put it down somewhere. You want to keep it for future reference, right?
Mm-hmm.
My own thinking on this evolved a little bit, and my goals may be different from yours here. But the question for me is, I'm thinking about this problem as storing for later retrieval. Like I have this idea that I build a library of interesting things that I can then somehow access later. But when I think about it, my real goal is not to have that library. My real goal is to put it into practice.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to make myself do, whenever I run into something really interesting, I try to force myself to use it within the next 2 or 3 days. Because instead of it like lying on some imagined library shelf, electronic or otherwise, then maybe I can start building it into my habits. And I think that to me is the ultimate goal for many of the things that I'm trying to learn, is not just understanding it, but actually getting it into practice as well. And that might be a slightly different problem to solve for than what you're mentioning here.
It is. It's essentially, the both are, to me, are important, but I wasn't even considering that part, to put it into practice. Because in my head, if I start it and come back to it, at some point I'll put it into practice. But by reframing the problem, then you already more focus and you're more likely put into practice and memory. So I really like it. But from that exercise only, from the podcast, I realized a few things, that perhaps the initial framing, well, you just proved maybe the framing wasn't that good, or maybe there are two framings. I thought the framing is good, the solution was good, but it wasn't actually. And what was interesting to me is that I figured it out coincidentally. It wasn't something that I've done on purpose. I didn't sit down and do it. And it was kind of like in the moment, reframing it just because it happened. But I want to get better at it. So I'd like you to help me get better at reframing. So let's just imagine for a second that I'm, again, a manager who's got all this passion and willingness to change the world and to be the best possible leader. And I said, you know what, actually, problem solving is something I need to focus on. Where do I start?
I would say we covered a little bit the process, which is really just to go in, state the problem, and then get 1 or 2 other people to try to help you challenge your thinking on it. Now, let's kind of look at how you get better at actually doing that. What I did in my work is effectively to surface some strategies for questioning that are more powerful than others. A classic example is, everybody's been told this thing about asking 5 whys, like, to dig deeper into the problem. That's not always that great, because that actually traps you in the first framing of the problem. You start asking, why is the elevator slow? What you want to do instead is to try to look outside the frame. And with that, I mean, when you have a problem in front of you, actually think about what's missing. Asking the question, not why is the elevator slow, but is the speed of the elevator the right thing to focus on? Or is there something else going on? Are the tenants super angry with the landlord? And this is just their way of kind of getting back at him, or whatever it is. So that's one of the central strategies of understanding what questions to ask, because not all questions are equally powerful. Another powerful one applies to feedback as well, is to understand your goals. Very often we want to get somewhere, there's a problem kind of stopping us from getting there, and then we put all of our effort into looking at the problem without actually questioning, do we really want to go here? Or is there a different way of succeeding? Is there another way of achieving what we want to achieve? So the book kind of shares different strategies for doing that, 2 of which I've mentioned here, looking outside the frame and rethinking your goals, for instance.
So I just make quick notes, because there's something important that you've mentioned I clocked in. Is there another goal that we want to achieve? But I believe that we tend to focus is another goal that I want to achieve for you, for my team, for my business. Do I get it right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges, of course, of working together to figure out the alignment of goals. Because you will often end up realizing that people have multiple goals. Well, they want to achieve something, but they also want validation, and they also want job security. They also want, but people want many things. And if you don't understand what those goals are, you're actually going to get it wrong. A classic example is, let's say you work with a really demanding client, and whenever you provide them with some information, they ask for more information. Now, one goal here, of course, from the client's behalf is to understand exactly what's happening in detail. I would wager in that situation, the real goal to look at is actually a feeling of fear and dealing with with uncertainty. When people feel out of control, they often react by asking for more information. And often that solution to that is not to keep giving them information, but to give them a little bit of information and then to assure them that they're going to be fine. To go in and say, oh, by the way, we've actually run this thing with 15 clients, and here are some of the old testimonials. They really love it, and you can, by the way, access a recording of some of the old stuff. So you deal with the unspoken goal as well, which is to feel certainty around whatever you're doing with them.
Yeah. So typically, in a work environment, most of the conversations around personal development and goals are framed and literally framed during those every September conversation that you've mentioned into what's your next goal within my organization, and kind of like climb the ladder type of thing. And we stuck in that thinking like, my next goal is to be promoted, although not everyone wants to be promoted. People want more cash, more money, because, well, we have our needs. We have family. Perhaps I'm planning to have a second or third child. My real goal is to provide for them. My goal might not be to climb up the ladder, right? So we need to ask the right questions, so we're not setting ourselves on the path that is completely wrong. And once you go on that path of management that you didn't really want, that's a whole world of burnout and stress ahead of you, just because we didn't frame it in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah, with both problems and goals, you always want to ask, why is that important to you? Like, why is that a problem for you? Or why is that goal important to you? What are you, like, with the promotion, what are you trying to achieve? Well, it's really about financing my kid's college education. Right. Okay, well, we can't actually promote you now but we can figure out a cash bonus at the end of the year, or whatever kind of the way forward potentially is there.
You mentioned this classical ask 5 whys. Now, from my practice as a feedback coach, when I realized it's quite commonly to ask why questions at work. And what I realized is that you're putting people on the back heel. If you keep on asking why, it's annoying. It's annoying.
Yes.
Are you trying to catch me on something here? Although, the whys questions are a little bit better when the process, why it's broken, why, etc. It's even more important to ask them when you're having a coaching conversation. Stop asking that many whys, even at all, almost, because they're very much cornering people. It's like why? It's just. But like, I already stopped on second why, and you keep on asking me why. I'm like, what you're doing now? You're trying to make me look dumb in front of everyone else, right? That sort of feeling it actually has, rather than just let's just work it out together. So I love the advice of start asking so many whys.
There's a huge component you're pointing out here, which is around the trust. Like, if you're coaching somebody else, like, do they feel that you are on their side and that you're genuinely interested in understanding their problem and their goals? Or are you just kind of an annoying manager pushing them to, without respect for who they are, how they think about the world?
Got it. So I would like to, Thomas, work through a little bit around, let's just solve some problem. And the one thing that I would like to maybe discuss is very close to my heart, which is a feedback. And so let's just use a little bit of your expertise and see if my things that I arrived to, my conclusions, are the right one, or I can expand on it. But also I'd like to provide a little bit more context to everyone else, how we solve certain problems. So again, I'll go back to the idea of me being the manager, and I want to change the feedback culture in my working organization. And
Great.
And one of the first questions we ask, so why we have problems with feedback, is typically people start mentioning, well, because managers don't know how to provide it, because people don't listen, people don't like feedback, and so on and so forth. And what we typically end up with is trying to solve that problem by improving our skills to provide the feedback. which I think is the wrong place to start, really. But let's just wind it back. So if I want to improve my feedback culture, what questions I should ask myself first to reject that commonly known wisdom and assumptions that I already have, because I already have those assumptions, right? What would be the first sort of question that I should need to ask myself?
I'd say the first one is what's stopping you right now from having a better feedback culture? Because there's not, again, remember, I'm all about not applying the solution before you understand what problem you're trying to solve. And you might actually realize that there's different things at play. Like, you know, is it fear that's stopping people? If it's fear, is that justified because people get punished? Or is it just kind of slightly irrational that people have this? Is it that they don't have role models who show this? For the listeners here, before we started this call, Raf told me it was okay to swear on the podcast. Like, people don't do that, but when you see somebody else doing it, you think, okay, that's fine. So my initial question would actually be to diagnose what's going on in your workplace right now, since people don't give good feedback or proper helpful feedback to each other. Is it lack of skills? Is it lack of a process? Is it lack of the understanding of what feedback should do? Or what's the thing? And I'm curious, by the way, I'm curious, Raf, to hear, like, what would you say is the biggest barrier? Like, what is stopping good feedback cultures?
So there are two different answers that I need to give you. There is one that is Raf today that will share that with you, and there is Raf, me as a manager, who would also fall into that common sort of wisdom. Now, one trap that I felt right at the beginning is that because I'm a former pro athlete and I'm so wired into feedback, my understanding and relationship with feedback is different than most people. As in, I really understand the value of it. And here's the thing, we all understand the value, but as soon as we have the conversation, things are going completely different. You already mentioned the fear and the lack of skills. The lack of skills will be the first one. Like, managers don't know how to provide. I don't know how to tell people not to upset them. So we are framing this goal and putting it in smaller boxes that ends up with, I don't know how to provide. So I need to get better at providing the feedback, which is only a very small part of solving that problem, because the real problem, I believe, is elsewhere. It's part of the solution is getting better at it, but the real problem that people respond in a certain way to the feedback, and how we feel when we're about to provide the feedback, it's driven by something else. It's driven by that fear, and there is the emotions that feedback tends to trigger. And I think now we have to stay focused on that and drill a little bit deeper why that is, rather than, well, people are scared because of what? Because I'm not that intimidating. What they're scared of? Why they're scared of me? It's on them. It's snowflakes. It's millennials. It's that. And we just kind of like drifting away from the real root cause problems, I believe.
Right.
So
yeah. I love, this to me is a very interesting topic, and two good friends of mine, Sheila Heen and Douglas Stone, they've made some very good points about, for instance, you also need to focus on the ability to receive feedback. It's not enough to give.
You mean this?
Oh yeah, excellent. Yes, yeah. Thanks for the feedback. There they are. They're amazing. And I saw another really good point here. Last week, I was speaking in a program where the other speaker was Stanford professor Jamil Saki. And one of his core points was we become so focused on the goal of avoiding discomfort that we either don't give people negative feedback, or we become like, we dehumanize ourselves and become too harsh. And his point, which I thought was really strong, was to say, don't focus on comfort in the moment, focus on future growth. Go in and focus on how you can help this person in the future. Accept that this is going to be somewhat uncomfortable, but trust that they can become a better person. And focus them on that, and tell them, like, I have confidence that you can improve on this, and and so on. Very powerful insight to me, because I definitely fell into that trap of focusing on the discomfort instead of, and trying to avoid that instead of focusing on the growth.
Right. So I'll cut right to the chase, and I like that advice. And to me, it's a really good one, because it helps you to frame your approach and how you perceive the conversation. But it also won't take as much of those negative feelings and emotions that you're experiencing as a feedback provider from you, because there's still that fear barrier of how people will respond. And so I arrived to the conclusion that to do so, we have to change people's perception and relationship with feedback around. So I go back to how I perceive it as an athlete and how people at work perceive it. So my understanding and guessing is that you are still a little bit afraid of providing that feedback, not maybe necessarily only because of your lack of skills, or even if you are skilled, you'd still be scared of it, is because the experience that we all had during past feedback conversations. And so what I realized, what we have to do is to create an environment and workplace within my team that feedback is associated with something positive, meaning I have to focus to make sure that each feedback experience is a positive one and not negative, because each feedback conversation, doesn't matter what we have, it either adds or depletes from the shared pool of trust. So my responsibility is that each of them will add to that trust, not deplete. And that takes me to the point that we shouldn't focus only on providing feedback. And you've mentioned about those Douglas Stone and Sheila Hinn, right? About receiving feedback, requesting feedback, and positive feedback are three things that you can really change each feedback interaction in your workplace that will start peeling off that negative label and putting that positive one. It's almost like it's an anxiety problem. In the past, I've burned my hand against the hot stove several times. So next time I'm going next to the stove, I'll be cautious. In the past, managers was really bad at providing feedback with me. So every next feedback conversation, I'll approach cautiously. And you don't want to provide and create the same feeling to others. So let's just reverse it and start focusing on creating every feedback experience a bit more positive. That means receiving, requesting, and using more positive feedback. And with that, it will help people understand that your intention is good, is right, and you will earn that right and that trust to challenge people. And by doing so, you provide feedback, people are more receptive, and then you're like, wow, actually, people genuinely take it on board, and it is about helping them moving forward. And that, I think, is a long-lasting strategy.
And I think there's a very important point in when you were talking about a positive feedback experience. Doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's sitting and laughing and smiling.
No.
It means that maybe a week later you think back of it as a positive thing, something that made a difference. So it's not necessarily about the kind of the immediate mood. It's about, did it have a positive effect? Like
Yes, 100%. So as you can see now, I've stopped focusing on the typical common wisdom of being trapped into, I need to get better at providing feedback. Because when clients are reaching out to me or managers asking me questions, how do I get better at providing feedback? As in, they already define the problem and bring it to me. Help me get better at providing feedback. And that's not the actual problem. We need to change people's relationship to feedback by doing those things.
I'll share an interesting reflection I had on feedback, because there's so much common wisdom out there about how to do it. And one of the things is like, start with something positive and so on. I think differently about that. My own experiences is like, so when you do a lot of speaking as I do, people are kind and they come up and they say, hey, that was great, or something similar. And that's always nice. But if I'm honest, I'm not quite always taking that in, because it's a little bit performative. It's super nice. Then there's a guy who came up to me and said, hey, I love your show, but those 3 slides, they suck. Like, those 3 things you did there, you can't do that. That doesn't look professional. I immediately started listening. I loved the guy because suddenly, he was giving me something valuable, and he was right, and I hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
And he broke the convention. Like, if he had started with a long blah blah about how great the talk was, whatever. But interestingly enough, it worked much better. I took him more seriously because he came in and he dared put something straight away uncomfortable, instead of that like beating around the bush, blah blah blah, when we know something unpleasant is coming. Instead of just saying, hey, this didn't work, let's talk about it. The other things I loved, but this didn't work. So yeah, I don't know if that's been your finding too.
No, on point. And now let's just stop a little bit longer on that being nicey right at the beginning before the shoe will drop, and looking at it from the perspective of positive experience. By the time you get to hear the real value, your mind and your body will be consumed in wondering what will happen next. Like, the uncertainty is killing us, right? And so we walk away, yes, with the learning point, but also your mind will register another unpleasant feeling for such a long time, uncertainty, that you want to avoid it in the future again. So when somebody starts with this feedback sandwich, what it's called, it's like, but what will happen next? If you go straight to the point, hey, this is what I didn't like. Of course, there's got to be a different ways of providing it. However, what you appreciate is that honesty, and that helped you get better. Now, my experience is the same thing. People are nicey, are evasive and beating around the bush because they want to, avoid that discomfort, as you've mentioned earlier on, of upsetting people, right? So they're playing safe. So that's what you get. It was nice. It was good. Well done. But then if the feedback is always like that, number one, you don't learn. Number two, you start questioning people's intention. Now, your audience is not the same every day. But if the manager is doing it for their people, like, hey, that was good, that was really good, eventually we start questioning their intentions and credibility. Like, is that all you have to say? It feels nice to be say good job, but there is no content, there is not meat on that bone at all.
Yeah.
So it's got to be a little bit more than just that. But you're on point. If somebody breaks that convention and really gets to the point and helps you grow, you walk away thinking like, wow, my next presentation will be different, will be better because of that guy, because he wasn't afraid to share this feedback, wasn't avoiding that discomfort. He was sharing it with me because he knew he had that conviction that's going to help me in the future.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it.
Spot on.
Absolutely. So here's the thing, like one thing that I made a note around those feedback notes, because I quickly jump forward with it, is that we've mentioned a few things. Now, we mentioned fear, we mentioned this lack of skills, and they all partially right. Now, my concern here is that I cling into one that works for me the best. That is that common wisdom, as you mentioned, that most people tend to think that what I believe is the right problem. Again, consistency bias, we want to prove ourselves right. So if I believe that the skills is the real problem, I will write the fear part, but I will neglect it because I like that solution. I like that problem because I think I can fix that quicker.
Yeah.
How do I avoid that? And how do I escape from this trap of doing so?
The first question is, of course, whether you need to escape it, because there's we often use a specific tool because it generally works on most problems. Mm-hmm. So, this is a classic. If you give a boy a hammer, he's going to treat everything like nails. There's a reason we have favorite tools. And that's okay. It's not wrong to have a favorite approach. You probably have that favorite approach because it has worked for you in the past. What's important is to recognize when that is not working. When, let's say, you have somebody and you tried your approach with feedback on this person 2 or 3 times and nothing's really working. At that point, you need to take a step back and say, wait, what's going on here? Instead of just pushing forward more heavily, giving more feedback next time in stronger language or whatever it is. Like basic thing, maybe it's you realize with this specific person, it's actually not the knowledge they're missing. It's the know-how. Like they want to improve, but they genuinely don't know how. A fascinating study I remember from a book on raising kids is that when parents have to play with their kid, that's actually a skill set, like of allowing your kid to control the play instead of trying to manage their play. And the authors went in and studied disadvantaged parents, and they realized they had all the great intentions with their kid, but they actually needed to physically learn to sit still, not reach out for the toy, not tell the kid what to do, but just respond to what the kid was saying. So sometimes what looks like a knowledge problem or an intention problem is actually really a question of they don't know how to do it. And I need not to give them feedback, but actually to guide them or to provide some kind of coaching around the skill, if you will.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. There's one question that I always ask my guests, and I'm curious to learn from you as well. Who is the best coach-like leader that you work for or with in the past, and what made that person so great?
It was, I think, his kindness. And the person I'm talking about here is my old co-author and my old professor. I don't know if the picture shows clearly, but like this is my first book, which I co-authored with him. His name was Paddy Miller. He passed away here a couple of years ago. He was amazing. Like I was his student initially. We started working together, and he's everything that you wouldn't expect a business school professor to be. He was like completely shambolic, like chaos in everything, and so on. He was magical because he could go in when most people, they're very planned. Like say you are giving a talk. Or you are running a session with some senior executives who come in. a lot of people, me included, would go in and really plan that session carefully. He challenged me. So he said, okay, that went great. Next time I want you to teach that same session, but no slides, no plan. See how it goes. Like he taught me to improvise. And he did so by just throwing me into the lion's pit. And when I think back of it, like, he was both amazing at putting me in positions that I couldn't fully handle, and trusting that it'll come out all right. And I think, again, he just had a fundamental kindness to him. You knew that he was on your side genuinely. He was not trying to, well, he was also trying to achieve things and do things and whatnot. But you had you could just feel on his character that he truly, genuinely cared about you. And I remember there are many other professors whom I spoke to, and they were interested in working with me and so on. I said no, because I didn't have that feeling with him. On paper, he may not have been the ideal person, but in reality, he was, because you could sense he was fundamentally a good person, and like he cared. And I think that overrode anything else with techniques or with methods or whatever. It didn't matter, because you knew the underlying intention was there. And I should say, he was open to feedback as well. Like, weirdly enough, at that time, I was like a student. I was a kid. He was 30 years older. He was an esteemed business school professor. In that situation, many professors have a big ego and wouldn't accept feedback from a student. He embraced it. He was I remember I told him something, hey, we could probably do that better, and said like, yeah, I think you're right. Let's try that next time. And then we tried it next time. That was amazing, because suddenly you're like, wait, this person is actually open to receiving feedback as well, not just to giving it. So he's made a huge difference in my life.
And also, I'm guessing it feels good when you can actually help someone else who's helping you so much. And I'm guessing you're very much like me in that aspect. I'm always looking for ways to pay forward if someone helps me. And I had the same mentality in the past, that maybe I'm not good enough to help my GM when I was junior manager. I can't help that person if I'm this person. Today, I'm thinking about it differently. I can contribute in anyone's life, because I don't have to be that expert. I can share, I can contribute back. Exactly. But it feels good. It feels good when somebody else is like, yeah, let's take it on board and let's move something. Let's move forward with it, because people are,
absolutely. And I think a key distinction there is, in order to help people, you don't always need to have the solution for them. Sometimes all you need to do is to tell them how they come across to other people. Like, literally saying, hey, just so you know, but when you're in meetings, I've noticed that you, when you're trying to listen, you actually look like you're angry. Like, just be aware. You kind of, like, people think you're angry when you're just trying to listen to them. So that type of thing is super helpful. Also, because I think people in power, they are not used to somebody telling them the truth. Like, it's a little unusual to go in and confront them with something. So I think that can actually be a very powerful thing to do, even no matter how junior you are. You can actually go in with the right intent and give valuable feedback to senior people on something they may not have thought about.
Thomas, did you know, like, I got the same feedback, slightly different, that you just mentioned, that changed my life and my perception as a leader, as a manager. I was unintentionally harming how I'm coming across, and I wasn't sending the signal that I wanted through my body language. So here's the context. We were sitting in management meetings, and it was like 12 of us, always between 12 to 14. And at some point, my general manager, Kieran, sat me down and said, Raf, if you realize that when people are going through a different problems and solutions and they're sharing ideas, you look disengaged? And I mean, what do you mean? Like, I'm paying the most attention that I can only have. He said to me, Raf, when people are sharing their perspective, their thoughts, you look up to the ceiling. And I was like, I didn't know that. But I explained to Kieran why that is. And then it makes sense, and I had to work on it. And I realized, so the way my imagination works, if we brainstorming the problem, so let's just assume like we are brainstorming together some ideas, and you're sharing your thoughts, I tend to look elsewhere, because my brain works like a projectors. Imagine going yourself to the shop with 20 TV screens around. What I do is, when you say the idea, that it's projected on one screen, but my counter idea is on another screen and another. So what I do, I look up the ceiling and kind of like almost flicking my eyes left to right, which to you in the moment looks like I'm disengaged, I'm bored. whilst in fact I'm paying you the most attention I can only do.
I'm nodding because I'm the same. I find it distracting, like, to have too much eye contact, because I think better when I can focus just on the listening, on just on the
Wow, fascinating. So you see, you just look down the desk, which again, to people who don't know you, might think you're rude. You're not listening to me, dude. Like, and then you create stress to them, and they're not anymore as open. And the next question comes up, they won't share the hand because I don't like to be ignored by others, like Thomas just did. But they don't know that you're listening. So for those who are listening right now, guys, be clear with your team. If you know that you have certain habits, let them know that's how you tend to focus. If you don't, ask. And it doesn't have to be your manager. Anyone can do that for you, because you're bound to have a certain habits that others finding distracting and perhaps even disrespectful, which is not your intention. And I get it wasn't my intention to create a lack of psychological safety and come across as somebody who doesn't listen. That's how I operate. Nobody ever for years told me that. Imagine this, Thomas. Nobody for years told me that. What? So guys, please, if you see if somebody comes across differently and not as comfortable, professional as you think, let them know. They'll appreciate it for life.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so interesting to me. And I like another reflection on that is, of course, that for you didn't invite it. Like that there's something about your behavior that may have signaled to people that you are not open to feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't share it. So even and that was clearly not the case. I mean, you like feedback. So
I like.
Yeah. So even the act of saying to people, hey, listen, if there's anything you think I should do differently, I'd love to hear it. Like, please share it. Like, or ask them more specifically, what's one thing I should improve for next time? Just almost forcing them, or at least creating the room for them to say, you know what, that thing didn't work. This could be better, or whatever it is.
And I'll just add another layer to it to be more specific. Let them know what you're working towards. So if you figured out that you want to work on your body language or come across as a good listener, say, hey, I want to come across as a good listener. Are there any moments when I'm coming across as not? Are there any moments that you find that I'm switched off? Let me know when that happens. And that's just like literally pinpointing, this is what I want. And we go back to what people tell you when you're coming off the stage. Hey, this was really good. This was really nice. Another mistake that managers tend to do is say, hey, how was my presentation? How was my shift? How was my this? And it's so vague that people will play safely because they don't want to hurt your feelings. They will go, everything was good.
It's performative.
Because what you're really asking in the moment is you're asking them to figure it out, what it is that you want to hear. And that's already uncomfortable experience for me, right? So, hey, that's the one thing that I want to know from you. And that's what I'm trying to work on. Let me know. And that's all it is to it.
Yeah, and there's so many things you can do to like. So, for instance, I give a lot of talks, and one of the best ways to get feedback is to incorporate the feedback in the talk. So instead of saying we're going to send out an email tomorrow with a link to a survey, no, spend like towards the end, ask people on the call, tell them I have a final case I want to share with you, but before we go there, could you please just like, there's a link in the chat, just like answer 1 to 5 and give me one comment on what it is. 2 minutes to do that. Here's some music. And now here's the final case when we're done. Like, super simple, but you can do so much to just get feedback from more people, no matter what you do. Incorporate it into your meetings if you can.
I like that idea. Love it. There is very last question that I'm curious about, because I work with around feedback, and what I benefited from it really the most, I believe right now, is when I'm raising my kids. I'm 16 years old, Nathan, and 9 years old, Xavier. How did you benefit from writing this book? And how does that, your solving problem skills, help you the most, or the areas that help you the most as a person, as a Thomas, in your personal life?
I mean, I use it in a lot of areas of my life. One of them, for instance, in thinking about my relationship to my parents. And so this is a personal example, but that thing when I live abroad. I live in New York, and then sometimes I go to Denmark, and then I would sometimes stay with my parents. And I noticed this dynamic of great to see them for a couple of days, and then we had some old patterns that started reappearing, like, my mom would say something slightly critical, I would react a little bit, or I would say something critical to her or whatever. And then I just kind of realized that this was not about how I said it. It was what I did while I gave her feedback on something. So a very simple thing I started doing was, if my mother said something annoying, as can happen with all mothers, then I would tell her, like, hey, it would be nice if you didn't do that. But before I do that, I'd go over and give her a hug. Like super simple, but just like you speak about creating a positive experience for feedback. I mean, that's a very tangible example of that, of saying if you are criticizing somebody and you're stuck in a pattern that's not working well, think about what other areas you can do. For me, it was just to, like, remind us both that we really, really love each other. And then in that context, you take the edge off the whatever thing that might be critical you're sharing as well. So that's probably one very specific example where I applied reframing to my own life.
Wow. What a beautiful way to finish the episode. I'll tell you why, because this is another thing that I think we get stuck and we associate problems with ways of working. And, we talk about apps, we talk about, podcasting, we talk about other problems, forgetting that it's also applicable in humans' relationship, in one-to-one with your parents, your spouse, your kids, your employees. You can use the same methodology when you are working on relationship with others. Wow, that's...
I mean, you have the book behind you, but one of the core things I realized working with this method is people use it as much in their personal lives as they use it at work. And I think that's true for all good kind of methodologies, including feedback, that they are applicable to the whole of our lives.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Thomas, wow, what a conversation. I'm going to edit it and listen so many times and make notes. Thank you very much for being so generous with your time. Now, I know that you are on LinkedIn, but not as active over there as you are on Twitter, right? So that's when we can connect with you and engage with you a little bit more. Of course, there is What's Your Problem book, and I highly, highly recommend for everyone to get it. There is also audiobooks available to you guys. What else we can find more things about you and learn from you as well?
There's the book's website, howtoreframe.com, which both has some resources, some checklists, theory overview if you're into that type of thing, and additional other goodies there. And there's a mailing list as well. If you want to follow along, you can sign up for that there.
Fantastic. I'll drop all the relevant links into the episode. Wow, what a conversation. Thank you very much for it, guys.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now it's time to cut this live.
That's always the exciting bit.
Remove. See, the thing is, if I just press end the broadcast, we just